Hello and welcome to the Actuary podcast, produced on behalf of the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries, the IFOA. I'm John Watkins, a financial journalist, and as ever, your podcast host. This is our 10th episode now, so do check out all our great past episodes on our YouTube channel, where you can also subscribe and enjoy the Actuaries series of informative videos. In this episode, we're meeting climate scientist and honorary fellow Tim Lenton, Actuary and diabetes researcher Scott Reed, and IFOA award winner Clara Hughes. So, first of all, we're talking to Tim Lenton, who's joining us remotely, and he was recently interviewed in the Actuary's March-April issue. Tim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
It's certainly good to have you here. So you're a professor of Earth Systems Science at the University of Exeter, and for a long time your focus has been on tipping points. Can you briefly explain what you mean by tipping points and why they're so important?
Well, a familiar example would be if I invite you to lean back on your chair a bit, John, and you get to that balance point where you know that a small nudge one way or the other is going to make a big difference to your fate or the state of the system, being you and the chair. You could end up in the original stable state of being upright, or in a very different stable state, sprawled on your back on the floor. And when you go through the tipping point, you find you're in a state of we call it self-propelling change, right? And it gets very, very hard to reverse that change if you're tipping over backwards. Well, that kind of behavior, that tipping point behavior, can occur in all sorts of complex systems, including our climate and our societies. And tipping points can be good or bad, but the ones in the climate, or the Earth system, as we call it, are usually ones that are going to be pretty bad for us as humanity. Whereas the ones in our societies and technology could be the ones we need. There could be both bad or good ones in society, but we need some positive tipping points to kind of clean technologies and changes in behaviour that are going to get us to a more sustainable state where we're doing less to push the planet past damaging tipping points for us.
Yeah, understood. It's not overstating it to say that your work on tipping points has influenced the world's approach to climate change, not least in the setting of the global warming target of 1.5 degrees under the Paris Agreement. How do you feel about that? Do you feel a necessary sort of sense of achievement, or is it more the case that you're just doing the work you're driven to do?
I've always just been doing the work I'm driven to do, and to be honest, I'd rather be wrong on the bad tipping points in the climate than right, because I know that if we cross them, it's a lot of bad and cascading consequences for a lot of people. It's also been a slow burner. I've been kind of working on this for about a quarter of a century now, but I guess we've all been confronted by, like, tipping point changes in the world around us. We're beginning to get a sense of those in our life support system. We might have heard about the catastrophic dieback of coral reefs or things like that, but we also lived through a pandemic where suddenly self-propelling change changed all of our lives. And a decade or so before that, we had a major financial crisis where, seemingly one bank failing could threaten to bring down the whole stack of cards of the financial system. And we also getting the sense of, oh, suddenly there are all these electric vehicles on the road, or solar power is the cheapest form of power everywhere, and solar panels are exploding everywhere. So tipping point change, in a sense, I think, become more familiar to us, for good or ill.
Yeah, and you mentioned the positive tipping points, and you published a book at the end of last year called Positive Tipping Points. How much positivity can there be? Do you think we need to hear more about that, amongst all this sort of doom and gloom that we hear about in the news today?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely vital that we realise the good news stories as well as the inevitable bad news stories in the world. The crucial thing is, I think most of us, ordinary people confronted with something big and complicated like climate change, involving invisible gases and all this sort of stuff, you need to be a professor like me to get your brain around. And it's just little old you can very easily fall into the trap of thinking, well, if I do something, it's just not going to matter. But what I'm trying to convey in the book is that's not true. Actually, that little changes can sometimes cause bigger changes and create amplification, if you like, that ultimately can be transformative. So In the book, I really enjoyed going back to some characters like my distant relative Lillian Lenton, one of the suffragettes, a
Mm.
famous suffragette, part of a very small group of brave women who ultimately completely changed the norms in society for all of us, like to equal voting rights. But we've also all lived through more prosaic things, like when I was a kid, people just smoked in restaurants and pubs, and that was the norm, and
Yeah.
you'd be vilified if you lit up a cigarette in a restaurant today. So what I'm trying to get at in the book is the things that seem unbudgeable can transform, and that our actions can create cascading positive consequences. So it's the fact that the more of us who adopt, say, maybe it's the clean technology like the electric vehicle, or maybe you just change your diet, you eat a bit less red meat, you can then influence other people to adopt that thing. But at the same time, the more people who adopt, say, the clean green technology like the solar panels or the EVs or whatever, the cheaper, the better, the more accessible those technologies become, making it more attractive for the next person to adopt and the next one and so on. And we really need those kind of good amplifiers if we're going to accelerate out of trouble. And so that's kind of the take home message, and it's hopefully what I'd call a conditional optimism message. I mean, I don't believe in naive hope, but I believe if a fraction of us get on board with that message, the message of tipping points is that it only needs a fraction of us to change to ultimately tip everyone to change. So that's my sort of conditional optimism. I just believe that if a fraction of us will go with me on this, then we might get there.
Yeah, and it's a refreshing outlook. In 2017, you founded Exeter University's multidiscipline Global Systems Institute. What was the purpose behind that? Tell us a bit about that.
Well, the motivation, again, you could say was, this is as within the university as a bunch of basically thinkers, but the motivation was, hey, people are coming to us with all of these complex problems about systems and how could we understand, and it could be about understanding the climate crisis, but it could also be understanding what the related ecological crisis, or it could be trying to understand how could technologies transform, or social norms change. And all of these are kind of systems problems, hence we ended up with the global systems in the title. But also I frankly realized that there were a whole groundswell of us within a big institution like the university who are all thinking in a similar way, but also motivated by the same like values, um, and arguably, but could come together and have a shared vision and mission of what we wanted to do. But the values thing is like, well, we realized we're getting into a pretty desperate, unsustainable situation, and things could turn out really bad for all of us. But we have the chance, and we know something about the paths to a better future. So why don't we're only one piece of the puzzle, and we need to team up as thinkers with the doers. But part of the motivation was to create an institute, create a group that would also bring in the doers, that would bring in partnerships, work with the people out there in what, from the academic point of view, we might call the real world, to create change together.
Yeah, you're clearly an advocate of cross-disciplinary work. You've collaborated with Actuaries in recent years, co-writing 4 IFOA papers on climate change. The most recent one is Parasol Lost, which came out in January, and you were made an honorary fellow last year. So how much synergy is there between climate science and the world of finance in your view?
Well, that's a great question because actually there's kind of synergy and then there's different approaches, and that's important. So the synergy is, well, we've all, I suppose, everyone should have a shared interest in human survival and flourishing. Um, but also, it's fair to say whether they're regulated to or they're just moved to for personal reasons, the financial sector is increasingly trying to address, hold on, there's a lot of physical climate risk accumulating here. Stuff's becoming uninsurable. Climate damages are escalating in cost.
Mhm.
This is a real issue, and you can feel it in financial terms as well as human terms. So that gives us common cause. But the interesting thing is when climate scientists look at climate change, their default position is to talk about what's the most likely thing that's going to happen, what's the central prediction. But an actuary is a professional risk assessor. I mean, their job is to tell you if your company is still going to be solvent next year, and if it isn't, let's do something to fix that.
Mm.
So actuaries know that risk is fundamentally a different thing. You ask first, what's the worst thing that could happen, and what can we do to try and minimize that bad outcome? Um, and actually, I was perhaps innately drawn to a risk approach. Maybe it's in my, I don't know where that's come from, but it isn't the norm among my scientific colleagues. But it is, I think, exactly the right approach to climate change from a society and a financial sector point of view. And that's why we've got why it's been a great relationship, kind of working with the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries and really trying to communicate this clearly. This is the nature of the risk we're running with the climate and ecological crisis, and here's how we can better understand it, and then here's some clues about how we're gonna manage that risk and make it tolerable.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's not black or white, but is finance a baddie or a goodie in the climate change endeavour?
Well, some bits of finance are definitely baddies,
Mm.
and some are trying really hard and managing to be goodies. If you took it on balance, I think if you were being a objective scientist, as I'm supposed to be, I'm afraid you'd probably conclude that finance is more of a part of the problem than part of the solution at the moment, and that they need to. And I think they, as a sector, honest people within it would probably recognise the same. But there's now a significant fraction of the sector that's really shifting capital from just bolstering the old status quo of fossil fueled fossil powered economy and power structures, and instead shifting capital to the new opportunity space of growth in clean tech, alternative proteins, regenerating nature, you name it. So, as ever in human endeavors, there's a mix. We can all be both different times, and there's always a mix going on. But I guess that's the crucial message to the finance sector. You need to put your money where your mouth is. There's a lot of chat, as there is in all sectors, about, oh, we should do better and we should embrace that. We should realize we're a part of nature and da 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 da. Um, but you've got to act consistent with your stated position, and that's why I'm really excited about those actors within the sector who are putting their money where their mouth is, and have have backed the change and are winning big on if they back in the right parts of the change. The thing though is it's a human endeavor, and it has crazy incentive structures, the financial sector, and it's that and it until you rewire the incentive structures within everybody's, day job in the sector, you're not gonna get the outcome you want, which needs a somewhat longer term view than the fact that you might be fired or given a bonus on like in many cases, a quarterly, let alone annual timescale in
Yeah.
that sector.
Yeah, that might take some time to change. In your interview with us in the March April issue of the magazine, you said that you have a lot in common with Actuaries. You've touched on it a little bit already here today, but where exactly do you feel that overlap the most?
Well, I really think it's around understanding risk and how to respond to it, and then taking a concept like solvency, which actuaries would, as their day job, apply to, companies or other entities, but applying that to the planet. But we're doing that together. So with a great group of colleagues now from the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries, we kind of unpacked what does planetary solvency mean? Well, it means asking, you know, are we are we destroying our or risking destroying our life support system, and then we lose everything? And the answer is with a negligible probability, we are already running that risk. So any actuary would say, well, automatically we should be doing that's intolerable level of risk. We need to be doing something about that. And then that gives us a clear platform both for communicating the risk, but then starting to talk about, right, what can we do to control this risk, bring it down in simple terms?
Yeah. And do you think actuaries need more encouragement to embrace climate change within their work or to do anything fundamentally different?
Um, I think that quite a few are being drawn to the party, if I can call it that. That's probably the wrong metaphor. Don't think anyone as a citizen is able to sort of avoid the climate change issue. They might take different positions on it, but I think everybody who is aware that the climate is different to how it used to be, and that some strange stuff is going on. How bad they think that could be, or may vary. But as I think it's not difficult when working with actuaries as professional risk people for them to see this is a meaningful and significant risk. And I'm just trying to emphasize that they've got actuaries have a lot to offer because collectively as a society we've not been seeing climate change the right way as fundamentally an existential risk issue. So we need to bring together the people who are professionals in handling risk to help us, all of us on this what I'm going to call journey to try and get out of trouble.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. And if you could have one wish relating to climate change magically granted to you now, what would it be?
I think I'd like, through some kind of magic, for many more people to be able to see the world in the way that now I and a small group of us as scientists have understood a completely different view of the world that taps into old, like, indigenous wisdoms, but it's basically we are part of this basically, you could call it almost living system. We're breathing an atmosphere created by other living things and maintained by other living things. We live in a cool and relatively, until we started messing with it, relatively equable climate, thanks to the activities of other living things, mostly microbes. Um, Life is cycling all the elements it and we need to flourish to support productive food systems, water supplies, and all the rest of it. Until we can grasp and internalize that we are just a part of that system, we depend on it, it does not depend on us. Until we can act collectively with a kind of economics, if you like, that takes that on board, then I don't think we're going to get out of trouble. So my magic wand would be to somehow rewrite everybody's school books and journeys. So instead of being taught that we're the top of the evolutionary pyramid and nature is just there to service human emancipation, which is the message of the last 500 years in the Western culture, we need to get off that hobby horse and get a different view, because it's that different view that will lead us to a new kind of flourishing for the long run.
Yeah, well, Tim, it's incredibly fascinating and refreshing to talk to you on this topic. So thanks very much for sharing your thoughts.
Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. Thanks, Tim. That was fascinating, hearing all about your work and connection with Actuaries. Do read the interview with Tim in the March-April issue or online at theactuary.com. Our second guest this episode is Actuary Scott Reed. He's here in the studio to talk to us about recent research he's carried out into diabetes. Scott, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thanks very much, John. Nice to be here.
No, it's certainly great to have you. So you work at Zurich Insurance in London as Head of Experience Actuarial in the Life Protection Unit. So give us a bit of background and tell us what that role entails.
Yeah, I can. The Life Protection Unit that I work for, that's the unit I work for, was established actually last year. And it's headed by Tim Bailey, who's previously the CEO of the UK business, Zurich business. And the mission of this unit is to grow the protection business globally around the business units in Zurich. My role within this is my job title is Head of Experience Actuarial, but it's really to do with we've built our own in-house platform. And I lead I lead this project, and I've got a team of about 10 people, a mix of actuarial and data scientists. And the aim this year anyway is to roll, basically to onboard all the business, most of the business units onto the platform by the end of this year. That's my day-to-day job.
Brilliant. You've been on the IFOA's Health and Care Board for about 7 years now, and you're its current chair, and I understand that the work you're currently focused on is around diabetes. So tell us a bit about that and why that's so important right now.
Yeah, I mean, when you say 7 years, that's some time, which is quite hard to believe time passes so quickly. Basically before I was sort of the chair of the Health and Care Board, I was chair of the Health and Care Research Subcommittee. And one of the things we looked at diabetes, the topic, because it's quite a hot topic in industry, an important topic within protection business. And we realised there was a gap in basically the knowledge there. It was actually quite some time before any work had been done in this area. So we thought, as a committee, we set up the actually Diabetes Working Party at that time. And that Working Party, what they actually did, they carried out a literature review and a global underwriting survey as well. So that's what that Working Party did. Yeah, so to give you a bit more about diabetes, I mean, this is quite, and why it's important, it actually affects a very broad section of the population. There's about 1 in 10 people are impacted by diabetes. Wow. The other thing is a lot of people actually are undiagnosed with diabetes, type 2 diabetes anyway. Another thing that's quite important about this condition is it's linked to lifestyle factors. Type 2 diabetes linked to lifestyle factors like diet, BMI. So it's one of these conditions that's really, in terms of underwriting protection business, it's a major consideration. Mm-hmm. So part of the work, the actual inaugural paper we published in 2023 dwells into a lot of detail on the medical literature and the underwriting standpoint on this condition.
As part of the IFOA Diabetes Steering Group, you've carried out a research project alongside the IFOA's Actuarial Research Centre and the University of Leicester. So tell us a bit about that, about the research and the purpose behind it.
Yes, well, just to give you a bit of background, when we set up the Diabetes Working Party, when we carried out the literature review, we realised that a lot of the medical studies at that time were relying on data that was like a decade out of date. One of the sort of medical advances in diabetes at the time, there's two sort of major very effective medical treatments that have been introduced over the last 10 years that wouldn't really be in that data. So that's one of the reasons why we thought, we should really initiate some sort of research in that area. So that's one of the key reasons why we did that. So we actually ended up, so we ended up initiating this with the Actuarial Research Centre. We sort of set up a funded piece of research, and this is the first time I've done this because we actually we had co-funders coming in. Mm-hmm. So that's the first time we actually did that. So we raised the money, and one of the reasons we wanted to do this research was really to understand type 1 and type 2 diabetes in a lot more depth. A sort of nuanced research into mortality risk, to really understand that. And the other aim of this sort of research was really, if we understood this risk in a lot more detail and using up-to-date information, it could be a sort of a stepping stone to improving access for people with more complex medical needs, like people with diabetes. Then we ran an RFP process to select. We talked to a number of academic partners, and we ended up selecting Leicester University. And one of the reasons we did that was because they've got access to a database that's quite broad and called CPRD. So it's a GP. It gives you this NHS data across quite a large number of GP practices. For us, it was quite important to have the academic side, creating the models, and the medical side inputting into it. So that was quite an important part of that, of why we selected them, the University of Leicester.
Brilliant. And it's based on this research that you've created an app for insurers. using some software called Shiny. Can you tell us a bit about that and explain how that works?
Yes. No, what we did was University of Leicester, they output their results in spreadsheets, but to actually understand the results and to visualise it, I actually wrote the foundational code for this to actually as a check on the results to see if it made sense, and that's why it was initially built. But Shiny is an application which is like a dashboard using R code. So I started off, that's why I initially did that. And then with my colleague, Marosz Bobolski, who's a senior R developer, he sort of took the code and actually made it into a dashboard. Mm-hmm. So I worked with my colleague on that. And so the purpose of that dashboard is really to give a sort of a user-friendly interface for people to go in and play around with the app. They can compare the different populations. They can look at the different risk factors. In addition to that, with the tool and the modelling that University of Leicester did, we did comorbidities too. And I think this is probably quite a unique part of the model. It's quite a sort of all-encompassing model. Mm-hmm. So if they've got any other health conditions, that's also incorporated into the model as well.
To highlight all this diabetes research, the IFOA is hosting a sessional meeting this March in Edinburgh. What would you like to see come out of that sessional meeting?
I mean, I think one of the key things for us with this, there's a lot of work's gone into this research. There's a lot of time. We've spent money on this research as well, and a lot of people have been involved in it. So basically, we really would value, feedback from industry and people involved and practitioners within industry, what they think of the app. And I think that's the valuable thing I want to get out of the session in Edinburgh. Another thing is, I suppose, what we're doing is, in a sense, this type of work, it's sort of first time we've done this as an industry, co-funded research, building sort of a model, like an underwriting model. Mm-hmm. One of the things about this is that nothing like this exists in industry at the minute. There isn't anything in the public domain like this. Mm-hmm. So one of the questions that would be good to get feedback on from attendees, and actuaries working in the industry, practitioners, underwriters, is really just to feedback on, is this something that the Institute should do? Should we facilitate this type of research and make it public and put this sort of work in the public domain?
Yeah, understood. And the IFOA, I understand they're looking to increase the number of sessional meetings they carry out on different subjects. What aspect of the sessionals is it that you find so valuable, either as a presenter or a participant?
Well, from a participant point of view, the reason I value the sessional meetings is that it's quite a nice way to finish a project. We've spent quite a lot of time actually on this project, so it's quite a nice way of concluding it and getting feedback from industry, getting it published, getting feedback as well on the next steps. I'm not necessarily saying I'm going to do the next steps, but it's a good place to put it. And also the Institute can use this information because I think one of the strengths of the Institute is evidence-based research like this it gives a really good foundation for giving it, taking part in policy debate, public debate, feeding into various stakeholders like government, industry. On, based on this research, they can have a debate, with these different stakeholders. So I think that's a really valuable part of it.
Yeah.
But also sessional meetings are just really valuable for the fact that it gives a platform to share knowledge, have a discussion, and at the end of the day, we're trying to advance actuarial science. So that's one of they're the sort of the key parts of that sort of why sessionals are important.
Yeah, it certainly sounds valuable. Scott, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story. Really appreciate it.
No, thanks so much. It's good to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Scott. It was great to meet you, and you've given us plenty of insights there to think about. Our last guest today is actuary and long-time IFOA volunteer, Clara Hughes. Clara, thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me.
That's our pleasure. I'll start, if I may, by talking a little bit about your current role. You have AI in your job title at the Pension Insurance Corporation. So tell us a bit about what you do there and your involvement with AI.
So at Pension Insurance Corporation, my role is really to bring new technology, including AI, together with business challenges to create value. It's a very exciting role. I find it very dynamic. It's a chance to interact with all parts of the business and to manage projects throughout the organisation.
Yeah, fantastic. And you volunteered a lot with the IFOA as well in the 20 years or so that you've been an actuary. And last year you were voted on to council. So how are you finding that?
Yeah, I'm actually finding it really rewarding. It's probably a natural progression, having chaired a number of practice board and been on other working groups such as Diversity Action Group. And council now within the governance structure has a responsibility for setting the vision for the profession. So I do feel that although it's a privilege, it certainly is a responsibility that I have to take on. So I'm really very cognizant of the trust that people have placed in me in terms of placing their votes. So in terms of my particular themes that I'm looking to contribute on, obviously AI and how we adapt to that as a profession, and how we evolve our syllabus, and also looking to create inclusivity within the profession.
Fantastic. And when you have a busy job like yours, what does volunteering give you? Why is it important to you?
So volunteering has definitely provided a thread for me through my whole career. I find that the actuarial profession is quite unique in the modern world in the sense that it has a very strong community of volunteers. Some of my closest friends are people I've met through volunteering. So it's definitely a chance to give back in return for all the opportunities I've been given, I think.
Yeah, great. In 2023, the IFOA marked 100 years since the first women became fellows. And in 2024, you decided to set up a women's network at the IFOA, officially called the Women Actuaries Community. So what spurred you on to do that? Tell us a bit about that.
So it was definitely about creating a community space for women, opportunities to get access to role models, bridging gaps between different firms, as often women can find themselves in a minority within the working environment. It is something that we thought of very much as part of the 100-year celebrations, and we spent quite a long time planning this and getting the structure of it right.
And where would you like to see the group go from here? I guess as the membership grows, do you have specific goals that you would like to see it achieve in the coming years?
So really kind of to some extent more of the same. We've structured it in work streams. So we've got the events and comms, which we started off first, and that's really about getting the word out, bringing people together, making sure that they have all the opportunities to connect. And now we started looking at recruit and retain, which is thinking about any obstacles or challenges that women face as part of their roles within the profession, and what we can do to try to just make that easier. I would like to say I do think it's a very inclusive profession already. It's just about taking it that little bit further.
Yeah, and you recently won Volunteer of the Year at the inaugural IFOA Volunteer Recognition Awards. So congratulations on that. What does that award mean to you? And do you have words of inspiration for any other members considering volunteering for the IFOA?
Yeah, I was really pleased to get the award, actually. I do typically think of actuarial kind of awards going to people who are doing technical work, and this is very much community building. And so just having the importance of that recognised was great. I love volunteering because I've got a young daughter, and I just want to make sure that we're kind of contributing to creating a positive future for all of our children coming through. I would say in terms of words of inspiration, whatever you want to do, it is possible. So just go for it.
Well, that's a great message to end on, Clara. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
So a huge thank you to all our guests this episode. We hope that you've enjoyed listening, and do please remember to spread the word and subscribe on YouTube. And please join us again next time. See you then.